The first time Rowan Mercer saw the homeless woman outside Bellamy's diner, she was standing barefoot on freezing concrete, holding a paper cup with both hands as though it contained the last warmth left in the world. Her coat was stained, one sleeve was torn, and rain had flattened strands of dark hair across her pale face. Dozens of people passed without slowing down. Some looked away. Others stared just long enough to make her feel ashamed. But Rowan stopped, even though the folded eviction notice in his pocket warned him that he and his 7-year-old daughter might lose their apartment by the end of the week. What he did next would cost him almost everything he had left, and expose a secret powerful enough to change hundreds of lives. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Oxley Stories if you believe kindness still matters and broken people deserve second chances. And tell us where you are watching from tonight, because somewhere in your city, there may be someone silently waiting for a stranger to notice them. Rowan had just finished a 10-hour shift at Halcyon Auto Works, where he repaired delivery vans for barely enough money to keep the lights on. His blue coveralls smelled of engine oil, his knuckles were split from cold metal, and the ache in his back had become so familiar that he no longer noticed it. He had planned to use his last $14 to buy dinner for himself and his daughter, Lottie, who was waiting at an after-school center across town. Instead, he found himself staring at the woman beside the diner entrance. She wasn't asking for money. That was what unsettled him. She simply watched the plates of food passing behind the glass window while pressing one hand against her stomach, as though hunger had become something sharp inside her. Rowan knew that posture. He had worn it himself after his wife died and hospital bills swallowed nearly every dollar they had saved, but what could a man who was already drowning possibly offer another person? He stepped inside Bellamy's and ordered one burger, one basket of fries, and a glass of water. When the waitress told him the total, Rowan quietly removed the cookie he had promised Lottie and counted the remaining coins twice. Then he carried the food outside and held the plate toward the woman. She looked at him with startled gray eyes, not grateful at first, but suspicious. Rowan understood. Desperate people learn to fear gifts because gifts often came with conditions. He set the plate on the metal table and moved back, telling her she could eat without explaining herself. The woman sank onto the chair, but before touching the burger, she asked why he had bought food for a stranger when his own shoes were splitting at the soles. Rowan glanced down, almost embarrassed, then said that hunger did not become less painful simply because the person suffering from it had no name. The woman lowered her eyes, and for one fleeting second, something about her expression seemed too controlled, too observant, almost as though she was studying him rather than accepting his help. But why would a homeless woman be testing a struggling mechanic? Her name, she said, was Sarah. She ate slowly at first, but soon hunger defeated caution. Rowan looked away so she would not feel watched. When she finished, he noticed a faint red mark circling her wrist, like the impression left by a watch recently removed. Her nails were dirty, yet carefully shaped beneath the grime. Even her vocabulary seemed strangely polished. Rowan wondered whether she had once been wealthy, educated, or married to someone important, but grief had taught him not to pry into wounds another person was trying to hide. He asked only whether she had somewhere safe to sleep. Sarah nodded too quickly and pointed toward an alley behind the old train depot. Rowan knew the area. The temperature was expected to fall below freezing, and 2 people had been taken to the hospital from that alley the previous winter. He should have walked away. Lottie needed dinner, his landlord wanted rent, and his truck had less than a quarter tank of gas. Yet he heard himself offer Sarah the couch in his apartment for one night, unaware that her answer would place his entire future in danger. Sarah stared at him as though he had crossed an invisible line. She asked whether he often brought strangers home around his child. Rowan stiffened, offended by the implication, but he admitted that he didn't. His wife, Mara, had died 3 years earlier, and since then he had built his entire life around protecting Lottie. He explained that his neighbor, Mrs. Vale, lived directly across the hall and would remain with them until everyone felt safe. He would sleep on the kitchen floor, and Sarah could lock the living room door from the inside. There would be no pressure to stay and no questions asked. Sarah searched his face for deception. Then she looked toward a black sedan parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was running. Rowan assumed it belonged to a diner customer, but Sarah's shoulders tensed when she saw it. A second later, the car pulled away, and she whispered that she would accept his offer, though she still had not told Rowan who might be watching her. When Rowan collected Lottie, he expected confusion or fear. Instead, the little girl looked at Sarah's soaked clothes and immediately removed the knitted red scarf from her own neck. It had been the final Christmas gift Mara had chosen before she died. Rowan almost stopped her, but Lottie wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders with such solemn care that he could not speak. She told Sarah that the scarf was special because her mother had touched it, and special things were supposed to keep people warm. Sarah's face changed. The guarded expression vanished, replaced by pain so raw that Rowan briefly wondered whether she, too, had lost someone. But before he could ask, Sarah turned toward the window and wiped her eyes. That night, Rowan divided a can of tomato soup into 3 bowls and pretended he wasn't hungry. Sarah noticed that his bowl held mostly broth. She noticed the past-due electricity bill beneath a stack of school drawings. She noticed the landlord's final warning taped near the refrigerator. And she noticed that Rowan still gave Lottie the last piece of bread, even though his hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. What exactly had Sarah come there to discover? After Lottie fell asleep, Sarah sat at the tiny kitchen table while Rowan repaired a broken zipper on her backpack. She asked how long he had worked at Halcyon Auto Works. Rowan said nearly 9 years. He had once supervised 12 technicians, but after Mara's illness forced him to miss several shifts, a new regional director demoted him. Since then, he had trained younger men who were promoted ahead of him while he remained on the lowest wage tier. He did not sound angry. That surprised Sarah more than bitterness would have. Rowan simply said that anger consumed energy he needed for his daughter. Still, there was one thing he could not forgive. Halcyon had recently begun firing older mechanics and replacing them with temporary workers who received no health insurance. One of those mechanics, Amos Rigg, had suffered a heart attack 2 weeks after losing coverage. Rowan had organized a small emergency collection, but management warned him that further interference could cost him his job. Sarah listened without interrupting, yet her fingers tightened around the paper cup until it bent. Why did a homeless stranger react as though Halcyon's cruelty was personally hers to answer for? The following morning, Rowan woke to the smell of coffee. Sarah had found an old jar in the cupboard and brewed what little remained. She had also cleaned the kitchen and folded Lottie's school clothes. When Rowan thanked her, she asked whether she could stay one more night. A shelter had no available beds, she claimed, and she needed time to contact someone. Rowan hesitated. The rent deadline was approaching, and feeding another person meant cutting their meals even further. But Lottie appeared in the doorway and announced that Sarah could share her cereal, even though there was barely enough for one bowl. Rowan agreed, setting only one condition: Sarah had to help him search for a safe long-term place. She nodded, but when Rowan left for work, she did not go to a shelter. She walked 6 blocks to a public restroom, washed the dirt from her hands, and removed a slim phone from a hidden pocket stitched inside her coat. The moment the screen lit up, 27 missed calls appeared beneath a single name: Gideon Cross, board chairman. Sarah's real name was Serafina Voss, chief executive officer and majority owner of Voss Meridian Group, the corporation that had acquired Halcyon Auto Works 11 months earlier. At 36, she controlled a network of manufacturing companies valued at more than $4 billion. Newspapers described her as ruthless, brilliant, and impossible to deceive. But 3 months earlier, an anonymous letter had arrived at her private office. It accused senior executives inside Halcyon of stealing wages, falsifying safety inspections, dismissing injured workers, and manipulating employee records before each corporate audit. Every investigation Sarah ordered came back clean. Every manager smiled. Every document appeared perfect. She began to suspect that the corruption reached all the way into her own executive team. So she designed an experiment no advisor approved. She disappeared from public view, disguised herself as homeless, and spent several days outside Halcyon facilities to see how employees treated someone who could offer them nothing. The black sedan belonged to her security detail. Rowan had unknowingly become the only person in the entire experiment who stopped to help, but kindness was not the only thing she had come to investigate. Gideon answered on the first ring, furious and relieved. He warned that the board was preparing to declare Sarah medically unfit if she remained unreachable. Her chief operating officer, Dorian Pell, had already begun calling emergency meetings and suggesting temporary control of the company. Sarah told Gideon not to interfere. She had found evidence that Halcyon employees were being abused, and one mechanic had confirmed details that matched the anonymous letter. Gideon asked for the mechanic's name, but Sarah refused to give it. Until she knew who could be trusted, Rowan was safer as an ordinary man with no idea who slept on his couch. Gideon then delivered worse news: the anonymous whistleblower had vanished. His name was Amos Rigg, the same mechanic Rowan had mentioned the night before. His apartment had been emptied, his phone disconnected, and no hospital could confirm his location. Sarah stared at the cracked restroom mirror, suddenly understanding that she was no longer conducting a simple ethical test. Someone inside her company was hiding people, and Rowan had already placed himself in their path. At Halcyon that afternoon, Rowan was summoned to the office of plant manager Curtis Bale. Curtis shut the blinds and placed several printed photographs on his desk. They showed Rowan outside Bellamy's with Sarah, entering his apartment building with her, and walking Lottie to school the next morning. Rowan's blood went cold. Curtis claimed the woman was suspected of stealing from customers near the diner and warned that Rowan's association with her could embarrass the company. Then he offered Rowan an unexpected promotion, a significant raise, and enough advance pay to settle his rent, but only if Rowan signed a statement claiming Amos Rigg had fabricated allegations after being dismissed for misconduct. Rowan understood immediately. The photographs were not about Sarah. They were leverage. Curtis knew Rowan was desperate, knew his daughter could lose her home, and believed desperation would make dishonesty affordable. Rowan stared at the contract while imagining Lottie's little bed being carried onto the sidewalk. Then he pushed the papers back and refused. Curtis's expression hardened as he asked whether Rowan was truly willing to make his child homeless for a man who might already be dead. Rowan returned to the repair floor shaken but determined to finish his shift. 20 minutes later, a hydraulic lift failed while holding a delivery truck above a young mechanic named Quillen Shaw. Rowan saw the vehicle tilt and threw himself forward, dragging Quillen clear seconds before the truck crashed onto the concrete. The entire building shook. Instead of calling emergency services, Curtis ordered workers to clear the area and warned them not to photograph the broken lift. Rowan examined the severed safety line and realized it had been deliberately loosened. Someone wanted an accident, and since Rowan had been scheduled to work beneath that truck, Quillen had almost died in his place. Rowan slipped the damaged locking pin into his pocket before management could remove it. He had just refused to sign a false statement, and less than half an hour later, machinery meant to protect him had failed. Was the warning inside Curtis's office more literal than he had understood? When Rowan reached home, he found Sarah helping Lottie build a cardboard model of the solar system. For a few seconds, the apartment looked peaceful. Then Sarah saw grease mixed with blood along Rowan's sleeve. He tried to dismiss the injury, but she insisted on cleaning the cut. As she wrapped his arm, Rowan told her about Curtis's offer, the photographs, and the lift collapse. He expected Sarah to urge him to call the police. Instead, she asked precise questions about maintenance logs, inspection dates, camera locations, and the damaged part he had taken. Rowan slowly reached into his pocket and placed the locking pin on the table. Sarah examined it like someone familiar with industrial equipment. When he asked how she knew so much, she said she had once worked in manufacturing administration. It was not entirely a lie, but Rowan could feel the distance between them widening. Then Sarah noticed a tiny serial number etched into the metal and asked Rowan to trust her with the pin for 1 hour. Why would a homeless woman need evidence from a sabotaged machine? Sarah walked into the hallway and sent photographs of the part to Gideon. Within minutes, he confirmed that Halcyon's maintenance system listed the same locking mechanism as replaced only 6 days earlier at a cost of $11,000. The replacement supplier was a shell company controlled by Dorian Pell's brother-in-law. Sarah finally had proof that corporate money was being stolen through fraudulent repairs, but proving attempted murder would be harder. Gideon urged her to leave Rowan's apartment and return under security protection. Sarah refused. She had spent years believing that power meant standing alone, yet Rowan had endangered his home to protect a colleague and risked his life to save a man who had received the promotion denied to him. Leaving now would protect her, but it would expose Rowan. Before ending the call, Gideon warned her that Dorian had discovered someone was investigating Halcyon from inside the city. Sarah returned to the apartment, and the moment she closed the door, someone knocked 3 times. Rowan opened it to find Mrs. Vale trembling in the hallway. 2 men in business coats had been asking neighbors whether a dark-haired woman was staying with him. They had shown no police identification, yet they knew Lottie's school and Rowan's work schedule. Sarah's face lost all color. Rowan locked the door and demanded the truth. She could no longer claim that she was merely unlucky or hiding from an abusive landlord. Still, Sarah could not reveal everything without risking the investigation. She told him that powerful people from her former workplace believed she possessed information that could expose them. Rowan felt betrayed. He had brought her into his daughter's home, and she had allowed danger to follow. For the first time, kindness felt like a mistake. He told Sarah she had to leave before morning. Lottie heard from the bedroom and began to cry, but Rowan remained firm. He had already lost one person he loved. He could not gamble with the only family he had left. Sarah accepted his decision, though the quiet grief in her eyes suggested she had expected abandonment long before it came. That night, Sarah slept on the couch while Rowan sat beside Lottie's bed with a baseball bat across his knees. Near dawn, he heard the front door open. Sarah had left silently, taking only the torn coat and Lottie's red scarf. On the table, she had placed an envelope containing $300. Rowan stared at the money, then ran downstairs and found her waiting at the bus stop beneath a gray morning sky. He pressed the envelope into her hand and told her he would not accept payment for helping someone. Sarah reminded him that he needed rent. Rowan said that need did not give him the right to sell his dignity. Then, despite everything, he gave her the address of an old church run by Mara's former nurse, Sister Eloan, who would offer shelter without questions. Sarah asked why he was still helping after she had deceived him. Rowan answered that mistrust and mercy could exist at the same time. He could protect his daughter without wishing suffering on Sarah. Those words struck her harder than anger would have, but Rowan walked away before she could tell him how much they had changed her. At work, Rowan discovered his access badge had been disabled. Curtis met him outside with 2 security officers and a termination letter accusing him of theft, reckless conduct, and sabotage of company property. Rowan realized management had reported the locking pin missing and blamed him for the accident. His co-workers watched through the factory windows, afraid to intervene. Quillen stepped forward, prepared to defend him, but Rowan shook his head. He would not let another man lose his livelihood. Curtis ordered him escorted from the property, then leaned close and quietly said that good people always believed truth protected them until the bills arrived. Rowan carried his toolbox across the parking lot in the rain, each step heavier than the last. His truck would not start. His phone showed 3 missed calls from the landlord. And when he finally reached Lottie's school on foot, the administrator informed him that overdue childcare fees meant she could no longer attend after-school care. Rowan had sacrificed his promotion to defend Amos, and now he had lost the job that kept his daughter housed, but how many more punishments could one honest choice bring? For the next 2 days, Rowan searched for work. Every repair shop in the district seemed to know about the accusations before he arrived. Halcyon had quietly circulated a warning that he was dangerous and dishonest. By Friday morning, the landlord changed the locks. Rowan returned from an interview to find their belongings stacked beneath plastic sheets beside the building entrance. Mrs. Vale argued until she was hoarse, but the eviction order was legal. Rowan loaded what he could into his broken truck and told Lottie they were going on an adventure. She tried to smile, yet when she saw her little bed left on the sidewalk, she hugged her mother's framed photograph against her chest and asked whether Mara would still know where to find them. Rowan turned away so she would not see him cry. That evening, father and daughter slept inside the truck behind a closed supermarket. Rowan gave Lottie his coat and watched frost form along the windshield. Somewhere in the darkness, an expensive black sedan slowed, but Rowan was too exhausted to notice who sat behind the glass. Sarah had spent those 2 days at Sister Eloan's church while Gideon assembled evidence. She could have returned to her penthouse at any moment. Instead, she remained in the shelter and listened to former Halcyon workers describe unpaid overtime, falsified injuries, and threats against anyone who complained. One elderly man recognized Amos Riggs' photograph and said Amos had visited the church shortly before disappearing. He had left behind a sealed flash drive with instructions that it be delivered only to someone named Rowan Mercer. Sister Eloan had not understood why. Sarah opened the church safe and found the small device wrapped inside a page torn from a maintenance manual. On the paper, Amos had written that Rowan was the only man at Halcyon who had refused every bribe and treated every worker like family. The flash drive contained payroll files, hidden recordings, emails between Curtis and Dorian, and photographs of defective machinery approved for use despite known risks. But the final video showed Amos speaking from a motel room. He said he feared for his life, and if anything happened to him, the evidence had to reach Rowan because Rowan would choose people over power. Sarah now understood that the men she had been testing had unknowingly been chosen by the whistleblower first. Gideon traced Rowan to the supermarket parking lot. When Sarah arrived, she saw Lottie sleeping beneath a thin blanket and Rowan awake behind the wheel, guarding her through the night. Shame overwhelmed her. Her investigation had not created Halcyon's corruption, but her absence from ordinary workers' lives had allowed it to grow. She had studied reports from a glass office 50 floors above the city while men like Rowan carried the cost of every lie. Sarah knocked gently on the window. Rowan stepped out, shocked to see her wearing a clean black coat, polished shoes, and no trace of the grime that had disguised her. Behind her stood Gideon, 2 attorneys, and a security team. Rowan immediately pulled Lottie closer. Sarah introduced herself by her full name. The words meant nothing to him until Gideon explained that she owned Voss Meridian Group and every Halcyon facility beneath it. Rowan stared at her, unable to speak. The hungry woman he had fed with his last dollars had never been homeless at all. His shock turned to anger. Rowan asked whether his eviction had been another test and whether Lottie's hunger had been part of some wealthy executive's experiment. Sarah did not defend herself. She admitted that she had disguised herself to expose corruption, but she had not predicted how quickly Dorian's network would retaliate. She said she had failed Rowan by remaining hidden after danger became clear. Then she handed him Amos's flash drive and explained why it had been meant for him. Rowan barely reacted to the evidence. He wanted only one answer: was Amos alive? Sarah said Gideon's investigators believed they had located him in a private rehabilitation facility registered under a false name. Records suggested he had been admitted after an assault and kept sedated by someone paying cash. Police were already on their way. Rowan asked to go with them. Sarah warned that the situation could be dangerous, but Rowan refused to abandon the men whose courage had cost him everything. Even after losing his job and home, his first concern was still someone else, and Sarah realized that no boardroom speech could ever teach what Rowan carried naturally. Amos was found alive that afternoon. He was weak, bruised, and terrified, but when Rowan entered the hospital room, the older mechanic began to cry. He confessed that he had copied records after discovering defective lifts were being left in service so executives could steal maintenance funds. Dorian's men had threatened his family and forced him into hiding. Amos had trusted Rowan because years earlier, when Mara was sick, Rowan had still donated 3 vacation days so Amos could care for his own dying brother. Rowan had forgotten the gesture. Amos never had. With the flash drive, the locking pin, medical records, and Gideon's financial investigation, police arrested Curtis Bale and several Halcyon executives. Dorian Pell attempted to flee through a private airport but was detained before boarding. The scandal reached every major news outlet by nightfall. Yet when reporters asked Sarah who had exposed the truth, she did not name herself. She named Rowan Mercer. The next morning, Sarah convened an emergency meeting at Halcyon. Hundreds of employees gathered on the repair floor, expecting layoffs or closure. Rowan stood in the back wearing the same worn coveralls in which he had been fired. Sarah walked onto a temporary platform and publicly admitted that corporate leadership had failed its workers. She announced full back pay for stolen wages, restored benefits for dismissed employees, independent safety oversight, and a permanent emergency fund for families facing medical crises. Then she called Rowan forward. Everyone expected her to offer him money. Instead, she placed a new employee badge in his hand naming him Director of Workforce Safety and Ethics, with authority to stop production at any facility where lives were endangered. Rowan looked at the badge, then at the workers who had remained silent while he was escorted away. He could have accepted the position and enjoyed the power management once denied him. But he said he would take it only if no worker was punished for having been afraid, and only if temporary employees received the same safety protections as executives. Sarah agreed before he finished speaking. There was one more condition. Rowan asked that the position not remove him entirely from the repair floor. He wanted to keep working beside the people whose trust he was expected to earn. Sarah smiled and said that was precisely why the role belonged to him. The workers began applauding, softly at first, then with enough force to echo through the building. Quillen was the first to embrace him. Amos watched through a live hospital feed, tears running into his gray beard. But Rowan's victory still carried one unfinished wound. He had no home to return to, and although Sarah offered him a company residence, he hesitated. He did not want Lottie growing up believing powerful people could erase every hardship with money. Sarah understood. Instead of giving him a mansion, she helped arrange a fair lease in the same neighborhood, close to Mrs. Vale and Lottie's school. Rowan insisted on paying rent himself once his first salary arrived. Dignity, he reminded her, was not the refusal of help, it was the freedom to stand again after accepting it. Weeks later, Sarah visited Rowan's new apartment carrying a carefully wrapped box. Lottie opened it and found her mother's red scarf, professionally cleaned but still bearing one tiny repaired stitch near the edge. Sarah explained that the scarf had kept her warm on the coldest night of her life, though the cold had not come from the weather. For years, she had believed people were numbers on spreadsheets and loyalty could be measured through performance reviews. Rowan and Lottie had shown her that kindness was what remained when there was no reward, no audience, and no guarantee that life would return the favor. Lottie placed the scarf around Sarah's neck again and said she could borrow it whenever she felt alone. Rowan watched Sarah's eyes fill with tears, and for the first time since Mara's death, the apartment felt not merely occupied, but alive. Sarah began spending one evening each week at the church shelter without disguises or cameras. She funded job placement services, temporary housing, and legal assistance, but she also served meals, washed dishes, and listened to names she once might have forgotten. Rowan often joined her after work, bringing Lottie and Amos when his health improved. Their friendship deepened carefully, built not on rescue or debt, but on the uncomfortable honesty that had first brought them together. Sarah never asked Rowan to forget her deception. Rowan never pretended the pain had vanished. Trust returned slowly through kept promises, quiet gestures, and the way Sarah used her power when no one was watching. Months later, when a reporter asked Rowan why he had fed her despite having so little, he said the question was backward. A person did not need abundance to be generous. Sometimes the people with the least understood the value of giving most clearly. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to believe in humanity again, and subscribe to Oxley Stories. Your support helps stories of kindness, courage, and second chances reach people who may be struggling silently tonight. Special request, comment, kindness sees the person, if you believe no one should be judged by their clothes, their job, or the place where life has left them. 1 year after the day outside Bellamy's diner, Rowan returned to the same metal table with Lottie and Sarah. The diner owner had replaced the old scratch chairs, but Rowan could still remember the rain, the paper cup, and the choice that had seemed so small at the time. Sarah placed a framed photograph on the table. It showed the three of them at the opening of the Mercer Rig Worker Protection Center, a free resource for employees facing retaliation, wage theft, or unsafe conditions. Beneath the photograph was a brass plaque engraved with a sentence Rowan had spoken when he believed Sarah had nothing: "Hunger does not hurt less because the person suffering has no name." Rowan ran his thumb across the words and looked toward the busy sidewalk. People hurried past carrying their own invisible burdens, just as they had on that freezing morning. He finally understood that his last $14 had never purchased only a meal. They had purchased a moment in which one human being refused to let another disappear. That moment had saved Amos, protected hundreds of workers, transformed a powerful CEO, and given Lottie proof that her mother's kindness was still alive in the world. But the greatest change could not be measured in money, promotions, or buildings. It lived in Sarah's habit of noticing the person everyone else ignored. It lived in Rowan's refusal to let suffering make him cruel. And it lived in Lottie's red scarf, passed from one wounded heart to another, carrying warmth no fortune could buy. Because sometimes the person sitting hungry outside the window is not waiting to discover whether you are rich. They are waiting to discover who you are when you believe they can give you nothing in return.